Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's virtual meeting on people-centered justice in Ukraine. I'm Anthony Triolo, and I represent Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, one of the co-conveners of today's event. Before I begin, there are a few housekeeping points I would like to mention. We're happy to offer simultaneous interpretation for today's meeting. If you're using a computer, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see a globe icon. Please select your language.
Доброго дня всім учасникам. Я повторю, що сказав Ентоні українською. У нас сьогодні є...
Good afternoon to all participants. I will repeat what Anthony has just said in English. Today we offer you interpretation into English or Ukrainian. Please check at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is an icon of a globe where you can select English or Ukrainian. Opt for Ukrainian and you will hear the synchronized interpretation into Ukrainian. Should you have any technical problems on the list of the participants, you will see Anton as co-host, as support, and his mobile telephone number. So you can write to him directly or telephone his mobile number. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you. In addition, a few other housekeeping points. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And this event will be recorded for internal purposes only. So we assume content is given unless otherwise stated. It will also be live streamed on the USAID New Justice Team Facebook page. And please feel free to use the chat for any questions you may have. And please feel free to write in Ukrainian. Today's virtual meeting is the first in a series of two. In addition to Pathfinders, the other co-conveners of this virtual series include the USAID New Justice Program, the Ukrainian Access to Justice School of Practice, and the Legal Development Network in Ukraine. This virtual meeting aims to bring together various government and non-governmental actors in Ukraine to introduce the concept of people-centered justice and to discuss how a people-centered approach can help address the justice problems people face, including during the pandemic. Please see the chat box for the agenda and the biographies of speakers. A people-centered approach to justice starts with an understanding of people's justice needs and follows with new solutions designed to solve them. In the past, justice reform has focused primarily on buildings, processes, and institutions. But this has failed to close the justice gap for the billions of people around the world. People-centered justice empowers people to seek solutions and provides them with quality services throughout their justice journey. It's about helping people reach a destination where they believe their problems have been fairly resolved. People-centered justice is also delivered by a justice system that is open and inclusive, and that works in collaboration with other sectors such as health, education, housing, and employment. When people seek help to resolve their needs, they should find help regardless of where they turn for assistance. Today, we will hear firsthand from speakers how people-centered justice approaches in other countries have resolved people's justice problems and increased access to justice. We now have a number of speakers who will briefly welcome us to today's meeting. First, we have His Excellency Denis Malushka, Minister of Justice of Ukraine. Minister, I turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.
Thank you very much indeed.
Я буду, якщо вже є переклад
If there
українською.
is interpretation from Ukrainian,
Перш за
I will be
все,
speaking in
хочу
Ukrainian.
відзначити, що
First of
я
all, I would like to
ненавиджу
point out that I
давати
hate
будь-які вітальні промови до
to
будь-яких
make
офіційних
any
заходів, тому що, як
welcome
правило,
speeches
як
at
учасник
any
таких заходів завжди
specialized
вважав це
meetings
досить
and events
нудним і
because as a member
нецікавим.
of such
І, власне,
or
завжди очікував,
participant of
щоб
such
вони
events, I always
якомога
thought that they
швидше
were boring,
закінчувалися.
and I would always look forward to
Тому
them
і
being
зараз я
ended.
буду якомога коротшим, але
Therefore, I will
виняток,
try to
чому
be
я
as brief as
зараз
I can, but the
зробив із
exception
задоволенням прийняв
why
участь
I'm
у цьому
making it
заході,
now and I'm happy to
тому
make this welcome
що
speech and to
тема,
participate in today's
заявлена
event
до
is because the
обговорення,
topic
вона мега
that we
важлива.
are discussing today is
Причому
super important.
її важливість
And
є
the
не
importance
тільки
of this
у
topic lies in the
правосудді,
fact that
а
it
вона
relates to justice,
крос-секторальна, як уже було
but it's
правильно зазначено,
cross-sectoral, as was correctly
і стосується
identified,
абсолютно
and
усіх
it
сфер
concerns virtually
діяльності
all
будь-якого
areas
уряду.
of activity of virtually any government
Будь-який
in the world.
регулятор
Any
повинен
regulator
в першу чергу думати,
should first
сприймати,
of all
як
be mindful
він працює,
of
як він
how
функціонує,
it
з точки
functions
зору
and
людини,
operates from the
з точки зору
standpoint
її
of an
потреб,
individual,
з
of a
точки
human
зору
being,
її
the human needs,
зручності
and
інтерфейсу взаємодії.
convenience of the interface of
Правосуддя
the
це
interaction
один з
with these
можливих і
services.
важливих
Justice is one of
елементів
the
людиноцентричності,
important and
взагалі загального
essential
концепту
elements
людиноцентричності,
of the whole
який в тому числі
segment
проголошений
of human-centric approach, which was also proclaimed
поточним урядом України.
by the current
Тому що,
government in
нагадаю,
Ukraine, incumbent government in Ukraine.
першою
Because let me
заявою,
remind you
яку
that the
зробив
first statement
прем'єр-міністр
that
під
the
час
Prime Minister of
призначення,
Ukraine made when he was
було те, що
appointed
ми є
was
урядом
to
для
say
людей.
that we are a
Ця
government for
заявка,
people.
власне, вона
And this statement
наскрізним чином
basically
повинна
runs through
проходити через
or
діяльність
should
будь-якого
run through
міністерства, в тому числі і
any
Міністерства
activities of
юстиції.
any ministries and the Ministry of Justice inclusive.
В нашому випадку
In our case,
ми дотичні до
we
системи
relate
правосуддя і
to the
його
justice system
зручності чи
and its
людиноцентричності
convenience to
не тільки
human
у тому
needs and
сенсі,
wants,
що
not
ми
only in the
розробляємо
sense that
різноманітні
we
нормативно-правові акти і
develop
законодавство, яке
various legal
стосується
acts and
правосуддя,
legislation that
чи
concerns
альтернативних способів регулювання
justice
спорів,
or alternative dispute
але й
resolution
тому, що
ways,
ми
but also because
координуємо
we coordinate
і забезпечуємо
and
надання
provide
і
for
функціонування
the
системи
functioning
безоплатної правової допомоги,
of the free
а
legal aid
також
system,
забезпечуємо виконання
as
судових
well
рішень,
as
що є
ensure
важливими елементами
court
доступу до
judgments
правосуддя.
enforcement, which is also a
І
key element in
людина,
providing access to
користувач,
justice.
заявник
And the
повинні
user,
бути у
the
фокусі
claimant,
усіх
the plaintiff,
вказаних сервісів.
has to be the focal point of all of the services I've
В
just
першу
alluded
чергу, у
to.
моєму
First
розумінні,
and foremost, in my
найелементарніше, що лежить на
understanding, the
поверхні,
most basic thing
людиноцентричність,
that
вона
lies on the surface of
пов'язана
the human-centric
або може бути
approach
досягнута
and that can be
зручним
attained
інтерфейсом взаємодії з
is
державними
a
органами. І
convenient
в першу
interface
чергу
of
мова йде про
interacting with
цифровізацію,
governmental services. And here we're
електронізацію
talking
процесу
about
взаємодії.
digitalization of the process of
Це
this
ключ до
interaction.
успіху,
It's a key
і
to success.
він не тільки спрощує
It
доступ
does not
до
only
сервісів
streamline the access
держави,
to
але й
governmental services,
одночасно прибирає
also
чимало корупційних ризиків,
removes
пов'язаних
quite a
з
few
безпосередньою
corrupted
взаємодією з
risks and
державними
corruption
чиновниками.
risks, which are to do with the direct
І
interaction with
тому
governmental
це
officials.
перше, на що ми
Therefore,
звертаємо
that's the
увагу, і
first thing that
перше,
we
на що ми
stress.
реагуємо. Ми зараз
And the first thing
спрямовуємо
that we
зусилля
react
на
to, we now aim
цифровізацію
all of our
виконавчого
efforts
провадження
on the
максимально і
digitalization
зменшення людського
of
фактору,
any
а
kinds of
також на
applications,
побудову
judicial
електронної
applications
взаємодії
and
системи безоплатної правової допомоги,
motions
зокрема
applications, and
через
also free
мобільний
legal
додаток,
aid
який був
through
нещодавно
a mobile
запущений
application in
нашими
particular,
колегами.
which was recently launched
Ну, от,
by our
власне,
colleagues.
все, але знову ж таки,
That's basically all
мета
for
моєї
me,
участі тут
but
радше
the main
послухати,
purpose
почути
of
корисні
my
думки
attendance of
і
today's
ідеї,
meeting is to
які ми
listen to
зможемо
very
впровадити у своїй діяльності.
useful and helpful ideas that
Дякую.
can be implemented in our activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for those insightful
Yeah.
remarks. I now turn to Mr. Bogdan Monich, Chair of the Council of Judges of Ukraine. Please, the floor is now yours.
Добрий день, шановні колеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm also happy to welcome all of you because the topic for our discussion is really fascinating. And as the head of the Council of Judges, the body that takes care of coordinating and organizing the judicial work in our country, I may say that the judiciary in Ukraine over the last several years has been trying to aim its activities, first of all, to providing quality judicial services to its users. Therefore, naturally, the topic that we are about to discuss today really draws the general attention of the whole judiciary, and I can confirm that the coronavirus and the pandemic in fact forced a lot of the bodies and the bodies of the judiciary, as well as any other governmental bodies, to work in emergency situation. And I would say that the main trend that we have to continue developing under the circumstances is the implementation of as many electronic services as we can possibly do that. And in the judiciary system, we are trying to do exactly that. And a great number of many trials are already done as a form of conferences, video conferences. But as we implement electronic justice in our country, so far, there are still a lot of issues that arise. And if we talk about one of the priority trends and areas of our activities that needs to be further developed, this is the implementation of electronic services. But I will definitely listen with a great deal of pleasure to our speakers and presenters of today. I would also like to hear more about the concept that they have to offer and about how the bodies of the judiciary can work in a better way in order to provide their services and to approximate these services as much to the users as we can do that. Therefore, I would like to thank all of the organizers for today's event, and I wish everyone and all of us constructive discussions and gain a lot of helpful information, which I'm sure we definitely will. And at this point, I can only say that I have another appointment to keep. Therefore, for a while, I will leave, but I will definitely join you again from my mobile telephone on Zoom connection to make sure I can listen to your valuable discussions today as soon as I can do it. And therefore, I would also like you to send all of the necessary links of today's event in the chat box so that I can avail myself of them. So as I promised, I will be back as soon as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monich. We will now hear from Mr. James Hope, Mission Director of USAID for Ukraine and Belarus. The floor is now yours.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to join Minister of Justice Malyushka, and the Council of Judges Chair Monich, as well as our keynote speaker, the Honorable Alison Maynard Gibson, joining us today to help launch this series of national consultations on people-centered justice. I'm particularly thankful to the UN Task Force on Justice and the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies for their support in developing this initiative. So each of us has a role to play, right, in making the justice system more accessible and people-centered, more understanding and more responsive to the needs of the citizens here in Ukraine. And today's conversation is extremely important because if we look around the world, the numbers are actually quite shocking. According to the UN Task Force on Justice, a report called Justice for All, 5.1 billion people, or 2/3 of the world's population, lack meaningful access to justice. So it's no surprise that the United Nations made it one of its sustainable development goals, calling for equal access to justice for all by 2030. Now, in addition to the legal and social aspects, the lack of access to justice impacts economic development. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reports that legal problems cost countries between 1/2 to 3% of annual GDP. This is a very high price to pay. And Ukraine, like so many other places, faces similar challenges. Surveys conducted here as recently as 2018 show that approximately half the population has experienced at least one legal problem over the past 3 years. And most often, those complaints or problems involve common disputes about households, consumer rights, healthcare, labor issues. And yet, according to that same survey, 1/3 of those who had experienced a legal problem made no effort to resolve the problem due to the barriers that challenge access to justice. So to address this gap, justice sector actors and all of us have to put people at the center of the justice system. The justice system, the justice sector, this is where there's tangible impact on the lives of citizens, where government and people come together and meet. So this is why USAID has supported the Ukraine's efforts via the Ministry of Justice and the Council of Judges and civil society and many more to help make the justice system more accessible and more efficient by working to help improve professionalism of judges and lawyers, drafting legal and regulatory changes, and raising public awareness about legal issues. And I hope, as we all do, that today's discussion will result in a roadmap, let's call it, that will enhance access to justice for Ukraine's most vulnerable populations. Now, like all strategies or roadmaps, that's just a piece of paper. So it's even more important that we commit ourselves to taking action to implement and achieve the goals that are going to be laid out in this people-centered justice approach. This will help make Ukraine's justice system more people-centered. And so in doing so, all of you will not only help those most in need of support, but this will have a direct impact on the confidence in the ability of Ukraine's legal system to provide justice. And I mention this because it's highly relevant to the current situation in Ukraine, where a crisis in confidence in Ukraine's justice system caused by the recent Constitutional Court decision threatens to undermine Ukraine's anti-corruption progress that's been made and architecture. Our position has been clear. Without strong anti-corruption legislation and institutions, we believe that there can be no true rule of law in Ukraine. So, Minister, as a partner, honored judges and dear colleagues, we're here, all of us today, to work towards a more people-centered justice system to help increase that confidence in the justice system. And that's why we, as well as the other G7 countries here, have welcomed the efforts of pro-reform forces to come together to resolve the situation. Our view is that concerted efforts must be taken to further strengthen anti-corruption institutions and reestablish that judicial system that has the full confidence of the people. And the reason, as we all know, it's quite simple. Ukraine needs and deserves a judicial system with strong, effective, and efficient anti-corruption institutions. This kind of system will ensure that Ukraine also becomes an even stronger international partner in matters ranging from trade, investment, and diplomacy to international peace and security. It rests on the shoulders of a strong justice sector. So we have a common goal, all of us, all 50 plus people on this call, to strive to give Ukrainians a justice system that they can be proud of. We're committed to that at USAID and all of the other parts of our colleagues at the US Embassy to supporting Ukraine's efforts to achieve that goal. And I'm confident that the solutions that you will all agree on today will move us towards that goal, towards a people-centered justice system with greater access for the most vulnerable. So I wish you a very successful and productive event today. Very excited to hear the discussion and the panels. Appreciate the partnership with many of you on the call today and look forward to working together as well on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. And for our final welcome remarks, we have Mr. David Vaughn, Chief of Party, USAID New Justice Program. The floor is now yours, David.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anthony, excuse me. Шановні пани та панове, шановні пані міністри Малуська, шановний пане голова Ради суддів України Монич, Шановний пані, директор місії USAID Hope. Добрий день. Радий вітати всіх від імені
Good
програми USAID.
afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of USAID New Justice Program. I'm grateful to our partners for their assistance in organizing of this important event. As you know, our program has been supporting the judiciary, the government, the parliament, and civil society of Ukraine in development of an independent, accountable, transparent, and efficient judiciary, serving the purpose of improving access to justice and protecting human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, from our experience, we know that legal services have to meet the needs of the people. They need to be accessible for everyone, and also they need to give consideration to the needs of the vulnerable groups of people. Therefore, our program has set up the first ever public justice centers in Odessa, Chernihiv, Chuhuiv, and Bila Tserkva, first in Ukraine. And the program has provided assistance to development and assessment of the court operations. The program supported increasing awareness of judges about considering cases on domestic violence, and developed training programs for free legal aid lawyers protecting rights of children. Moreover, our program has been supporting the Ministry of Justice in improving efficiency of court judgment enforcement, as Mr. Minister mentioned, and only 3% of the court judgments are enforced, which is a significant barrier on the path towards people-centered justice, and it affects the trust and confidence from the public to the justice system. Dear colleagues, access to justice is not merely about access to the judiciary. To resolve legal problems, the citizens require both legal aid and ADR and efficient system of access to legal information, online services includingly. And here, innovative solutions and engagement of both state and non-state professional organizations might help. That is why we are very happy to support the discussions of people-centered approach to justice and its role in preventing and resolving legal problems in the society. I would also like to emphasize that Ukraine is the first country in the world that has the consultations on people-centered justice with participation of high-level experts, world-renowned. I'm hoping that during our event today, we will identify how people-centered approach in Ukraine will help solve problems related to access to justice, in particular, the issues that people have faced during COVID-19 pandemic. Last but not least, I would like to say that we are ready using people-centered approach to support the forming of a working group to develop a roadmap of solving urgent issues pertaining to access to justice in Ukraine. I wish you the best of inspiration and discussion, because it's only the beginning of our work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David. I now have the distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's meeting, Ms. Allison Maynard Gibson, former Attorney General and Minister for Legal Affairs of the Bahamas. Ms. Maynard Gibson also served as a member of the Pathfinders Task Force on Justice. For those of you who are unaware, the Task Force on Justice was chaired by the Ministers of Justice of various countries and brought together a distinguished group of leaders and experts to accelerate delivery of SDG targets for justice for all. In her remarks, Ms. Maynard Gibson will explore the benefits of a people-centered approach to justice and will provide concrete examples from her experience. The floor is now yours, Allison.
Good morning from the Bahamas. It's my honor to address this national consultation on people-centered justice. and to join His Excellency, the Minister of Justice, the chair of the Council of Judges of Ukraine, and other representatives of government and civil society to advance the cause of justice for all in Ukraine. Justice is the golden thread linking each of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Who can imagine gender equality, no poverty, decent work and economic growth, or any of the other 13 SDGs without a focus on justice? As was mentioned, I was a member of the Task Force on Justice, which was an initiative of the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. In the Justice for All report, we estimate that globally, 5.1 billion people lack meaningful access to justice. This is a shocking figure. While people in all countries are affected, the burden of injustice is not randomly distributed among people. Women, children, poor people, people with disabilities, and people from minority communities are some of the most vulnerable groups that find it hardest to access justice. And this difficulty is magnified if people have 2 or 3 of the vulnerabilities. For example, a woman who is poor and disabled. The COVID-19 pandemic has further compounded the global justice gap. The OECD Economic Outlook projects that global GDP will decline by 4.5% this year. This will lead to a wave of layoffs, bankruptcies, debt, evictions, land loss, migration, and disputes between businesses and consumers. The lockdowns have increased domestic violence, and they are triggering a spike in divorces and other family disputes. This calls for ministers of justice to see justice as more than providing legal remedies. Each of these problems have socioeconomic impact. Justice impacts the entire governance system. More than ever, a people-centered approach to justice is needed. And by this I mean a system that is open, inclusive, and works in collaboration with other sectors, including health, education, housing, and employment. After all, people can get access to the services they need to solve their legal problems holistically, regardless of their point of entry. And it is important to include the public and private sectors and to encourage everyone to think in systems rather than in silos. I want to repeat that, to think in systems rather than in silos. While the Bahamas and Ukraine are different, our citizens experience similar justice problems. So I'd like to give some examples of people-centered initiatives implemented in the Bahamas when I was Minister of Justice, how we collaborated with other sectors and included the private sector. The first example is a system using reliable internet access, whereby on their island, remember the Bahamas is an archipelago, so on their island, rather than coming to the capital, Nassau, people could get certified copies of essential documents like birth and death certificates. We also implemented a system of live birth registration on their island rather than them having to come to the capital. This identity paper solution also impacted immigration, health, and education services. They were all able to now have real-time data and effectively plan and make decisions based on data rather than anecdote. Also, reliable internet access that is now necessary will enable telemedicine to be provided in these remote areas. The second example involved unlocking the transformative power of innovation to bring new players into the justice sector, as well as develop approaches that deliver justice at scale. Utilizing the private sector, we invested in technology solutions in all of our courts. For example, witnesses could now give evidence by video conference from their island or even from another country, rather than traveling to the courts in Nassau, the capital. Also, people on remand could participate in court applications by video conference from prison, rather than being transported by automobile to downtown Nassau or by air to any of the other islands. As well, all of this enabled the swift disposition and resolution of matters. And the video conferencing facility in the islands is used by other government service providers who now meet with colleagues by video conference around the country and obtain services for people in the islands without the need to travel to the capital. Now, all of this was done prior to COVID-19 and saved millions of dollars in travel and other expenses, cut out travel time, and enhanced collaboration between agencies. And so it was interagency and intra-agency collaboration. What was then an experiment proved to be vitally important during hurricanes and now during COVID-19. So while others were installing technology for Zoom type hearings, our technology that had already been installed was now being used more. The third example involves giving regular access to and updates from the Minister of Justice. Regular meetings with CSOs and professional organizations representing the private sector stakeholders are tangibly people-centered and invaluable. They enable the Justice Minister to listen to people who are not reluctant, very happy to bring forth their suggestions, to monitor the effectiveness of initiatives, to promote buy-in, and also it helps to minimize bureaucracy. The fourth involves the imperative of data. Gathering, collating, analyzing, and regularly disseminating data is important to galvanize trust and buy-in. It's called commonly accountability and transparency. As well, it demonstrates to international agencies and others system sustainability. And system sustainability is necessary to attract investment so that initiatives can be brought to scale. As you can see, these people-centered initiatives that are accounted for in the justice silo affected many parts of governance, of the governance system. So what was accounted for or budgeted in the justice silo have cross-government impact or a systemic impact. There was good return on financial investment, and they encouraged collaboration across government agencies, which of course minimizes bureaucracy. Also, they have cross-sectoral socioeconomic impact. Again, collaboration between government agencies minimizes bureaucracy, and successful innovation promotes even more innovation. It's a wonderful cycle, really, that promotes exponential growth, which also is necessary post-COVID-19. During your first national consultation, for which I congratulate you, I encourage you to imagine people-centered, bold possibilities to eliminate the justice gap, and encourage work across the governance system. And very importantly, as your minister said, a plan is on paper, but implementation is important. So I encourage you to find what others would call unimaginable ways to implement these bold possibilities. Diverse actors collaborating with each other and the justice minister can transform Ukraine and the world. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate, and I wish you every success in your meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, for those insightful remarks. I would now like to introduce Ms. Micah DeLangen, Program Lead on Justice for All at Pathfinders. Micah will provide an overview of Pathfinders and some of the key findings from the Justice for All report, the flagship report of the Task Force on Justice. The floor is now yours, Micah.
Thank you, Anthony, and a very big thanks to Alison Maynard Gibson for her willingness to share from her own experience in the Bahamas. And she has shared with you some of the results that People-Centered has brought to her country, that she has achieved for her country in the Bahamas. But I've had the pleasure to hear also a little bit about the difficulties she had to overcome to actually get there, and what had to be done, and what she did as a Minister of Justice to make that progress. We have an interview with her on the Champions of Change series, which is a series that the Pathfinders publishes. So if you'd like to read a little bit more about how she actually achieved all those results, please have a look at that Champions of Change interview. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our partners for organizing this. Thank you to the Minister of Justice and the Chair of the Council of Judges, and congratulations to all of you on this call. Indeed, this is the first national consultation on people-centered justice. So you have a world premiere, and we are very excited to be here with you and share a little bit from our perspective and from our international work, in the hope that that can inspire you in your work in Ukraine, and in talking to each other, in thinking anew about some of these issues. So as Anthony said, we both work at the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just and Inclusive Societies in New York. And I think it is in a way a shame that we can't meet in person, but at the same time, it's such a luxury to be able to meet with so many people in so many different places in Ukraine and around the world on this morning for us, afternoon for most of you. So before we turn to Ukraine and to some of the things that we've seen from the survey that most of you completed, I was asked to say a few words about what Pathfinders is and what we do. Let me just share my screen for the presentation we have to help illustrate that. It should be this one. Yes. So the presentation is in Ukrainian. I will be speaking in English, but I have seen all the text in English, so I hope I match the images to the right text. And then I have to, there we go. Oh yeah, just a reminder, all the materials are on our website. Ariana has been putting the links in the chat. This is the part we've already had. But let me talk about the Pathfinders for just a second. So Pathfinders is started shortly after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. And this had actually been quite a tough negotiation between member states of the UN here in New York. But in the end, peace, justice, and inclusion were adopted as goals that all countries should be working towards. And to make that real, a number of countries, some of or the ones you see on the screen, wanted to work together and like I said, make it real, really achieve some of the results, not just have it as words on paper. It's still a relatively informal group of countries working together, and over time a large number of international organizations, NGOs, and others have joined our efforts. And Anthony and I and Ariana, who is putting all the links in the chat, we work at the Secretariat at NYU at the Center on International Cooperation. So it really is now a multi-stakeholder platform and an opportunity for people to collaborate, to learn and to exchange. Now, one of the first initiatives that the Pathfinders took was the Task Force on Justice. This was mentioned, and Alison Maynard Gibson was a member of that task force. It was led by ministers from Argentina, the Netherlands, and Sierra Leone, very different countries with very different experiences. And it was, as you can see, it was joined by a wide range of different organizations that collaborate with each other in the context of Pathfinders. And this is actually a mix. All our partners is a mix of large international organizations such as the World Bank, UNDP, the OECD, the Open Government Partnership, and also organizations that work specifically, more technical organizations, work specifically in the justice sector, such as HIL, the World Justice Project, and many others. Now, the task force worked during 2018 and 2019, together with its many partners, and the final report was the Justice for All report. And in that report, we propose a very different way to ensure access to justice for all. It's a different way to think about justice, access to justice, not just providing access to the system that is already in place. So you have a system and you would just open the door and make sure everybody can access it. No, it's really about rethinking the way that the justice system operates and that it meets the legal needs of people. I'm very happy to say that the summary of the report is now available in Ukrainian. This is the one in English. We don't have the one in Ukrainian printed yet, but it is available online, and the link should be in the chat box. So please have a look. That's the summary version. The whole report is 136 pages long, so there's a lot of evidence and data gathered and collected in that report. In this short report, you can get the highlights and the key ideas that can hopefully be useful for you. I will say a little bit more about those ideas in a minute, but on this timeline you also see the Hague Declaration, which was a declaration and which has now been endorsed by around 40 countries, which set out the principles of people-centered justice, and Ukraine is also one of the countries that has endorsed those principles. So when the pandemic hit, so this was 2018, 2019, and then in 2020 we were moving into implementation. And then we had, of course, as we all know, the pandemic. And so we had to adopt and question ourselves and think about how what we have been working on, people-centered justice, would apply in the current context. So we brought together a range of experts from countries around the world to bring together analysis and policy advice in two briefings. The first one on justice for all and the public health emergency, and the second one on justice for all and the economic crisis. Both are also available in Ukrainian, thanks to our partnership with Yevgen Plutenko. And these are also on our website. So let me lift out some of the key messages from the Justice for All report. And you can see it, look at the slide in Ukrainian. But first, well, we looked at the justice gap, and this number has been mentioned already in the introductions to this session. 5.1 billion people excluded from the rule of law. From different aspects, and the reason that it's not just a number that's interesting, but also the way we got to that number, because existing justice data usually measures how many cases there are, how long a case takes, et cetera, but that's all internal data from the system. We took this external perspective, looking at legal needs surveys and a number of other sources. And if you combine these sources, and there's much more, like I said in the report, that's what brings you to this big number of 5.1 billion people around the world. And I know you also have this data for Ukraine, and other speakers have also cited it. Both HIL and the World Justice Project have published data on justice problems that people are facing in Ukraine. The World Justice Project survey, in that survey, 47% of the people interviewed in Ukraine indicated that they were unable to resolve their justice problem. And according to the HIL survey done in 2016, 44% of the people think that it's not even worth trying to get justice for the problems they face. Now, these are dramatic numbers and they should be a wake-up call, but just to put that in perspective, this is similar in many other countries. So it's not just a Ukrainian problem. It's true throughout the world that we have built justice systems that do not have that link to what people actually need and do not provide what people actually need. What we also did in the Justice for All report is look at the case for investment. And since we're all lawyers here, I think amongst ourselves, we can easily agree that there should be more investment in the justice sector. But can we convince others? Can we convince the Ministry of Finance? Can we explain why investing in justice is not just the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do? And can we use the resources that we have better and use better strategies? So the number that was just mentioned by our colleague from USAID, the cost of a country is actually also from our Justice for All report, between 0.5 and 3% of GDP is lost by countries because of the unresolved justice problems that people have. And when I say people, I should mention, especially when you talk about the economy, this includes, of course, small entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises who are unable to resolve their problems. So it has both those perspectives. We also need smarter investment. I already mentioned that, not just funding the system as it is, but innovating it, finding better solutions, developing better ways of collaborating between different actors. And speaking of those solutions, there's no one size fits all approach. What people-centered justice means depends very much on the context. But based on evidence from around the world, it is possible to identify some approaches that help to improve people's justice journeys. As you see, that's also a core part of our report. There are 3 different steps we identify: empowering people and communities, providing more people-centered justice services, and finally, ensuring fair outcomes, because what is a justice system if it doesn't lead to a more just society? So again, much more on this in the report. I will briefly touch on the last component, which is preventing injustice, also a very important part of a critical role for justice actors. And this points to the need to create institutions that people can trust and to learn from individual cases in order to develop structural solutions and improvements. Now, I can talk about this all day, but there's much more on the agenda. So let me turn to the most common justice problems. Based on data from surveys around the world, it turns out that people have many of the same justice problems wherever they live. And these are the 6 most common justice problems that we have found based on 100. It's a collation of 100 different surveys from around the world. So problems with money and debt, or consumer problems, very big issue for many people. Disputes over housing or land, or conflicts with neighbors. Another category is difficulties related to access and quality of public services. Violence and crime, obviously, in the public sphere at work and at home. Family disputes, for example, around divorce and inheritance. And problems at work, whether as employee or as a business owner. So as I said, these are the 6 main categories of problems we find around the world. And while every justice system may be different, the problems that people face in their lives and that they turn to the justice actors for are often very, very comparable. So finally, turning to Ukraine again, I would like to thank everybody who completed the survey. It was very interesting to read through your responses as I was preparing for this meeting. And we asked you about your understanding of people-centered justice. Many of you pointed to the need to focus on people and their needs above the institutions. Many answers also included the need for a more humane system that is less punitive and that creates better social outcomes. If someone makes a mistake, they need a chance to be able to fix it, somebody wrote. And I think that's also a key component. Many people also made the link to human rights and the need to look not just at existing laws and procedures, but to whether they contribute to a fair outcome and a more fair society. You also gave some interesting examples of people-centered justice services that already exist in Ukraine. Many of you mentioned the focus on mediation and mediation skills. Some refer to the fact that in dealing with a divorce, justice actors have a responsibility not just to look at the legal situation of the divorce between the parents, but also to look after the best interest of the child. And finally, many refer to making justice services accessible, be it remotely, through innovations, or through making courts accessible to people with special needs. So there's a lot already going on, and I think a lot that can be built on in this roadmap to people-centered justice in Ukraine. Now, looking at these most common justice problems, we also asked you what problems you encounter most in your environment and in your work. And so this is, according to the survey, these are the most common problems that you have identified in Ukraine. The first one is family disputes, for example, around divorce and inheritance. The second is disputes over housing or land or conflict with neighbors. The third, violence and crime. The fourth, difficulties relating to access and quality of public services. And then labor disputes, and lastly, problems with money and debt. So that's your assessment of what the most common problems are, and I think that can be a good guide map to some of the discussions that you will be having. And as you know, we've chosen with our partners, we've chosen some of these most pressing justice problems to be the focus of the breakout sessions, and to try and really apply that people-centered approach to the justice problems, to allow you to have a conversation with an open mind outside of the existing structures and procedures about one specific justice problem. What is behind it? What are the underlying issues? Where do justice actors help, and where do they actually make things more complicated? And to encourage you to think outside of the existing structures and procedures, I would actually like to end with this quote from Albert Einstein. I can't read it to you in Ukrainian, so I'll read it to you in English. If I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes to thinking about 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. And the reason I'm putting this up here is because, you know, it's so easy to jump to the solutions, to think about the structures we know. But our challenge for the sessions that you will be having at the end of this morning or afternoon is to really think about to take that broader perspective, take that people-centered perspective. So with that, I would like to end. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to the session today and to working with you in the future.
Great, thank you, Micah. And for our last speaker, before we start the interactive session, I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Mr. Andrew Solomon, Senior Rule of Law Advisor at USAID. Andrew will speak about how USAID is integrating a people-centered approach to justice system reform and adopting it to the problem sets they encounter in the countries they work in. The floor is now yours, Andrew.
Thanks, Anthony. So I just want to say I'm very pleased to join everyone today. I see some friends and some familiar faces. And I join you from USAID Center for Democracy, Rights, and Governance in Washington, D.C. I will be very brief coming here at the end because I do not want to stand between you and the important work that you're about to do. But I do want to say that today's gathering is really a significant effort to take the rhetorically appealing and the conceptually powerful approach to rule of law promotion and justice reform that we know now as people-centered justice, and to operationalize it, to make it real, and identifying the concrete steps and the activities that can be taken to solve legal problems and justice needs that Ukrainians experience in their everyday lives. So your effort today puts you, as has been suggested already, in the vanguard, at the front line of a global initiative to shift the paradigm in promoting the rule of law from one that has, until recently, really tended to focus too much on the justice institutions and their specific needs and outcomes. So things like greater independence, efficiency, accountability. Now, those things are important and institutions matter, but I would suggest that not enough attention has really been given to the needs and experiences of the people and the communities that these institutions are really mandated to serve when these people seek justice. So in many countries around the world, and this may be the case indeed in Ukraine, we see that public trust in justice institutions is low. At USAID, we believe this can be explained in part because these institutions are not delivering justice for all. They're only delivering justice for the few. And they are not closing the justice gap. They're not getting at that 5.1 billion people who live outside the protection of the law. So we are at USAID also increasingly convinced that people-centered justice is a way to close that justice gap and create more secure and safe communities. And in the process, increase public trust and respect for the rule of law. And because justice and rule of law are fundamental to development, as reflected in Sustainable Development Goal 16, we see people-centered justice also as a means of promoting the more inclusive, equitable, prosperous economies and facilitating more healthy and resilient society. So at USAID, we, a development agency, we are putting people at the center of our global rule of law strategy, and increasingly putting rule of law at the center of our development mission. So we really hope to learn from you today on how to do that and take those practical steps so that we can work with others to take people-centered justice to scale. So as the discussion moves forward, I really encourage you to examine the role of data in transforming the justice system, but also identifying other new and innovative ways to make justice institutions more user-friendly, more solution-oriented, including how to change the behavior and the values of those who work in these institutions and whose job it is to provide justice and serve the people. But it's also important to remember that people-centered justice is also about the fundamentals and doing the basic things like openness and giving the public regular access to information and updates from justice leaders like Justice Maynard Gibson described that is being done in the Bahamas. And I really think that is a good example how people-centered justice and open justice initiatives like those that are spearheaded by the Open Government Partnership are really linked and reinforce each other. So we are also very much about how open justice works in tandem with people-centered justice. So thank you for including me today. I look forward to learning from you and the outcome of this discussion. And now I must drop off because I have a meeting with US federal judges and we'll be talking about how to take a more people-centered approach to improving justice in the United States. Thank you and have a great meeting.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very helpful. Now, in the interest of time, I would like to move directly to the next phase in our virtual meeting, the interactive session, of which I have the pleasure to moderate. We have convened a great panel today that will discuss how people-centered justice approaches in their respective countries have resolved people's justice problems and increased access to justice. So let me introduce our speakers. First, we have Gustavo Moreno, who served as former National Director of Access to Justice in Argentina, and who was a key partner of the Pathfinders Task Force on Justice. Second, we have Maha Jawid, CIC NYU Fellow and former Acting Director of the US Department of Justice Office for Access to Justice. Third, we have Dmitry Remini, Justice Accelerator Head for Hill Innovating Justice in Ukraine. And last but not least, we have Yevgen Poltenko, Executive Director of the Legal Development Network in Ukraine. As mentioned, their full biographies are listed in the program, a link to which has been posted in the chat. We will hear from our panelists for the next 25 to 30 minutes, and then we will open up the discussion for a brief discussion with attendees. So please feel free to post questions or comments in the chat, all of which will be monitored. When we are ready to open the floor for discussion, we will bring in your contribution. At the conclusion of the session, we will break up into smaller groups into the breakout sessions. My first questions are for Gustavo and Maha. You both work to advance access to justice in your countries. Gustavo, you are Argentina's Director for Access to Justice Centers, of which there are 90 in total throughout the country. These centers serve vulnerable populations that were previously unable to access justice. The model adopted by Argentina for advancing people-centered justice has inspired similar programs from around the world. And Maha, you worked in the US Department of Justice, Office for Access to Justice, where, among other things, you helped lead a cross-sectoral interagency effort to connect access to justice with other human and social services like health, employment, and education. Likewise, this all-of-government approach has been modeled in other countries. It'd be great if both of you can describe in a bit more detail the ways in which your offices work to expand and increase access to justice in your respective countries. Gustavo, we will start with you first. And it'd be great if you can talk about which strategies and approaches were utilized to place people at the center of the justice system and resolve their most pressing justice problems. Please go ahead, Gustavo.
Thank you, Anthony. It's a real pleasure for me to share this conversation with you all. So let me just mention three quick things from our experience in Argentina. There is a document that I would like to share with you just to help the translation process if it is available, but if it is not, it's okay also. There it is. So 3 comments as I mentioned. The first is just to underscore what is this people-centered approach about and what it really means for our practice. And as Andrew mentioned, there is a paradigm shift involved there. So that is the depth and the scope of what taking the people-centered approach really means. Is changing the paradigm from addressing justice issues and justice problems. And there are 3 specific aspects of this shift that I like to underscore. One is, as it was already mentioned, shifting from the institution-centered perspective to user-centered perspective. That means very specific, important issue, I think, that is addressing the justice gaps and access to justice barriers, not from the perspective of legal or institutional problems or practices, but from the capability and the legal empowerment perspective from of the people and the most disadvantaged populations. The problems that we have to focus on are the problems for people to know, to learn, to use, to take decisions in an autonomous way in dealing with their legal problems. It's about giving power to people, not just focusing on institutions and the functionality of institutions. So this is the first issue. The second is also really important from lawyers' perspective. As Mike said, we are all lawyers here, but shifting from access to courts specifically to access to rights, to solutions, to remedies, to make things happen for people. This implies adopting a problem-solving approach, not formalistic ones, and just learning on what works to really put rights in the hands of the people, put entitlements in the hands of people, and not just leaving or bringing people to some institution that may or may not solve the problems. Solving problems is the key when you take the people-centered approach. And the third issue, and I think is the more challenging one, is to shift from a case-centered focus to a legal needs-centered focus when we design institutions, services, and initiatives in the justice sectors. We lawyers tend to see everything in terms of cases, and just to select one part of the biography of the people and the life experience of the people in terms of the legal case that we are willing to deal with. And that is not a people-centered approach, it's a case-centered approach. When you deal with people's experience and the life experience of having legal needs or facing several legal needs, you have to develop a comprehensive and holistic approach to those problems. And that is the other part of this paradigm shift. So from institutions to people, from courts to rights, and from cases to legal needs. So when you take this approach, this paradigm shift, in terms of what it actually means in terms of public policy, it is important to understand the systemic consequences of this approach. It is not just about having a framing principle. We are calling everything people-centered approach, but we are doing the same as always. That is not enough. It is not enough to repeat people-centered till it becomes a reality. It won't become a reality if you just talk about it. But you have to develop the principle. You have to frame the values, the purpose, and the meaning of the initiatives, the policies, and the institutional designs, putting people at the center. That is a way to start. But then you have to translate that principle into strategic design. How you design the goals, the long and middle term goals of an institution or a program, the priorities, what to focus on first, and where to allocate the resources of your institution or your programs, and also the decision-making and governance process. If you take the people-centered approach, your decision-making and your governance process have to put the people at the center in a realistic way. You have to listen to people. You have to share your decision-making process with the people. You have to be willing to receive people's feedback and to act upon people's feedback. So you have the principle, you have the strategic decisions, and then you have the everyday operational practices. If you just claim you are doing people-centered services or making long-term decisions, but your everyday practice is the same as usual, is business as usual, you are not really bringing people-centered approach into the heart of your practice. That leads to the final point on how you put people-centered approach in practice. And what I can share in just 2 minutes, I think it's really basic, but maybe it's the start of a conversation. But the first thing is you have to develop an evidence approach to the demand for justice services. You have to create a robust set of evidence to understand social needs, in terms of legal needs. The general in your country, at the local where your services are performing, the potential legal needs and the actual legal needs that you receive in your service or your design or your institutions. You have to make informed hypotheses about what kind of cases you are going to receive, what kind of legal needs you are going to receive, and to evaluate if you are actually receiving that and how are you dealing with that. So you need information about social demand, really sophisticated, comprehensive, and updated information. You have to produce that through legal needs assessment, but also through your case management system, etc. Once you understand the social demands and the concrete configuration of your social demands and the gaps, the capability gaps that prevents people to access to justice services, information, and institutions, you have to adopt service delivery practices that can really match that demand. That is obvious, right? But in terms of practical decisions, your working methodologies have to respond to what you identified in terms of addressing the social demands. If there is a problem of trust, you have to solve that with your working methodology. How you solve the problems of community trust. You have to be present in the community, you have to engage with the community, you have to listen to the community, and you have to be consistently there to create the experience of a relationship with the community and then to develop trust. You have to do it every day in your everyday practice. And it is the same in your internal tools for work, your case management system. We all know about how important it is to have good case management system to identify the performance of justice services. But those case management systems have to be the model of work and have to be designed in a people-centered way. Just to give you an example, for example, in Argentina, we used to have case-based case management system, and we had to adopt them to make it people-based case management system. So you could have the whole history of the people, of every person that went to our services, and to capture the story, the problems, the relationships, etc. So when these people would come for a next time, we would have the complete history of her to work with, not just the history of a case, but a history of a person. That is just one example of the idea of adapting case management system to make it more people-centered. To wrap up, you also have to evaluate the performance and the services and to make strategic planifications of planning from the people-centered approach. How to define success and failure and good performance or bad performance should be designed in terms of solving legal empowerment problems, so solving legal capabilities challenges, etc. So your indicators, your process of evaluating and planning have to be designed in a people-centered way. So every aspect of justice services have to be reshaped to make people-centered approach a reality. I leave it there because I'm exceeding my time. So thank you so much. And I hope we can discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. And now I would like to turn to Maha. Maha, how did the U.S. Department of Justice convince nearly 24 other agencies that supporting and involving legal aid in federal programs for low-income and undeserved individuals was necessary to accomplishing their priorities? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Anthony. And thank you to all the organizers, the Ukrainian Access to Justice School of Practice, the Legal Development Network, USAID's New Justice Program, and Pathfinders for inviting me, and to all of you for listening to me today. I'm mindful of time, so I will try to be brief, but hopefully not so brief that my comments are not helpful. I'll just give a background, 2 sentences about this office from which I was once a part of, and then describe an interagency effort around connecting access to justice to other federal priorities in the US government. So in the United States, the Department of Justice is not a Ministry of Justice. It is primarily the primary office of federal prosecutors. And the reason why that's relevant is that the office from which I came, we were focused on improving access to justice at all levels. And in the US, as large as we are, that meant federal, state, local, tribal. And it meant both criminal and civil legal aid. And as an agency that was primarily prosecutors, we were not providers of legal aid. So what that meant was we had to be creative in identifying ways in which we could encourage and support increased opportunities for public defenders in the United States and civil legal aid lawyers to be able to access resources and to be able to overcome challenges that they face in our system here. So we were quite creative, and we were able to come across an opportunity to work with, as Anthony described, 22 agencies. That wasn't born overnight. It was really a slow development over a number of years that this interagency effort still exists today. That was really coming out of the idea of how we connect access to justice to other priorities related to obtaining results for social services that the federal government had deemed to be priorities. Things like healthcare, education, employment, even consumer rights. All of the work that is done by the federal government for low income and moderate income people and underserved communities to advance those priorities. Our approach was to develop an understanding amongst our federal colleagues as to how access to justice interventions advanced those priorities. So it was not a message about access to justice. It was a message about good government. And really that's also reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, as we know, as is described by the Pathfinders' excellent work in describing Goal 16 as 16+. We have a goal on access to justice, but we also know that to advance the other goals within the framework, you need access to justice. So I'll give one example just to give a sense as to how this came to be and what it looked like. The Department of Labor has a series of job training programs for individuals leaving prison and re-entering society. These are truly job skills trainings so that someone can have a new job and be employable. But in our country, often having a criminal record will mean you have a lot of legal problems that will prevent you from getting the job. So even if the program that the Department of Labor funded was successful in being able to train an individual to have a new vocation, a new job, they still may not be able to get that job if, for example, their driver's license had been revoked, which happens often in the US for having a criminal conviction. Or for example, if you have a child support order, an individual has to support their children while they're in prison, they can't maintain the support that they need to provide. And if that's not adjusted, then once they start working, they lose all of their income. Of course, they should support their children, but there has to be a reflection that the reason why they were not paying for so many years wasn't because they were choosing not to pay, but because they had no income. So these sorts of problems can only be addressed through the intervention of a legal aid lawyer. And so our conversations with the Department of Labor was to consider whether the funding that they were providing to the programs to provide new skills, new job training, if some of that funding could also be given to legal aid programs when necessary, so that legal aid could intervene and help resolve that legal problem. That's just one example. We have many, many more, and certainly I can give the link to a report that summarizes some of this work. The roundtable was launched in 2012. It was made permanent by President Obama in 2015, and it still exists today. USAID is a member of the interagency effort as well. And the reason why it really became evident that this was necessary was for a few reasons. One, people don't know that they have legal problems. There's a lot of research that demonstrates people think they have bad luck and they will not realize or go seek the legal help they need. So when we talk about people-centered approaches to justice, we also know we need to go where people are facing problems and try to respond to that with all of the responses that we know are necessary, including legal services. Another reason why this was needed is that it saves dollars, it saves money, taxpayer dollars to resolve legal need. So when we have these programs set up to respond and support individuals who have other needs in life, being able to respond with some legal interventions also saves taxpayer dollars, and we were able to develop research around that. And then finally, how was this successful and how does it still exist? Really, in addition to this notion that it was a good government message, not a message about funding more lawyers, it was political leadership, which is clear that you have today in this consultation, in your minister and in your judiciary being present. Political leadership was necessary and key, and really was probably the biggest reason why we were able to advance this work. And as I mentioned, it became permanent by President Obama through something called a presidential memorandum. We know all governments have methods by which the executive can issue a directive. And in fact, that presidential memorandum was issued on the eve of the Sustainable Development Goals summit, and tied to Goal 16 as our domestic commitment. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions later on. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Maha. That was very helpful. I would now like to turn the discussion to the pandemic and the role of justice. Yevgen, can you explain how people-centered justice solutions can address some of the most pressing justice problems facing people in your country today as a result of the pandemic? And how can justice actors contribute to the mitigation of the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic and contribute to economic recovery? The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon to everyone. My organization, Legal Development Network, which I'm represented here, is proud to be one of co-organizers of these first national consultations on people-centered access to justice in Ukraine. And for convenience of the majority of our participants, I will switch to Ukraine. Доброго дня, шановні учасники. Передусім, ніж дати відповідь на питання Ентоні, я хотів би декілька слів сказати про нашу організацію. Мережа правового розвитку – це асоціація неурядових організацій, які з 2009 року працюють у громадах, маленьких громадах.
Since 2009, we have been working in small communities in 15 regions out of the 25 regions in our country, and we work in the area of access to justice and enhancing legal capabilities for the general population. Concerning the decisions that could simplify and streamline the access to justice and could become the answers to some of the challenges that Ukraine has faced since the onslaught of the pandemic, we first of all managed to give the answer to this problem by providing legal services via digital solutions that have already been mentioned by the Minister Maluska, Minister of Justice of Ukraine, and we are proud that our online chat of legal consultations that was initiated in 2017 has been used this year, unlike last year. Only 10, let's say 10 people that came to our membership organizations gained access through distance services. So unlike that, this year, it was nearly half, 50% of the total scope of the legal aid provided was done online. And we are proud that unlike a widespread and robotized solutions, which are common in the so-called market of legal aid, the so-called and famous chatbots, our solution, unlike them, really allows individuals to communicate and interact, although via technology, but still with a human being, with a professional legal practitioner. And it's also noteworthy to say that behind these progressive approaches of digitalization, we still have to understand this is not a remedy, a panacea for people-centric approaches and decisions, because we have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of people, in particular in Ukraine, still don't have an access to such digital solutions for whatever reasons, either for a lack of knowledge or for a lack of capacities or abilities to use the equipment and the gear necessary, or even the lack of money to pay for the access to the internet. Therefore, we have to be mindful of these individuals and not push them, let's say, to so-called digitalized discrimination. I would also like to stress the importance of data and the efforts of advocacy mentioned by Gibson and Ms. DeLangen. For us in Ukraine, it's also extremely necessary. because I can think back to the case of recompensing for the damage.
Бойових дій на сході України. Результати нашого дослідження про реальний шлях таких постраждалих людей до відновлення свого гарантованого державою нашою правою на компенсацію.
The people went to court because they wanted to be reimbursed for their housing lost, and something that hasn't been decided in their favor for several years. And finally, the Ukrainian government approved as a working mechanism extrajudicial remedies for such people. And we also believe, and we also remember that today's speakers mentioned in their examples of people-centered approaches that such mechanisms can also be applied for the documents, for registering documents of their civil status for our fellow citizens who, let's be open and frank, for the majority of cases, they found themselves against their will in the territory occupied by the Russian proxies, and we believe this is only temporary and right now beyond the governmental control. And unfortunately, they have to go through a lot of very complicated and demanding procedures in order to verify the birth of their children, the death of their family members. And we believe, and we also insist, that finally the Ukrainian government should pay attention to that, and they have to approve of extrajudicial mechanisms for approving and endorsing such decisions, because these are not just declarations. This can really result in relieving the workload for a lot of courts in Ukraine. And today we're talking about justice for all. But in order to move to it, just as it was mentioned by today's speakers, without the proper understanding of how many people are suffering from the lack of fairness and justice, it's not enough. We need to think about what they miss and what they lack. And in Ukraine, we have a lack of such information and data. And that was a block for us to understand the needs and wants of the people who seek justice. And this educational program that we have initiated, that we are implemented together with the School of Practical Legal Knowledge in the sphere of judiciary and access to justice, it provides for a unique opportunity, not only for Ukraine, but globally, to shape within small communities the list of legal needs among the members of their communities. And according to this program, we combine the elements of education, awareness, and mentorship with the legal knowledge of our experts. And we also provide for the necessity to expand this program to the whole the board of Ukraine. It was started in 2018, and a lot of communities have already explored the needs and wants of legal character in their communities. 9 initiative groups have already participated in this program, and overall, more than 100 local enthusiasts have participated in this program. I'm really happy that in 4 communities, they have approached to the point that on the basis of this data collected, local policies will be approved, local programs will be approved and endorsed, given the needs and wants of the local population. And in our opinion, and it's our conviction that people-centered approaches are integrated in local policy making. Along with that, we have to understand that without at the local level, let me put it this way, it will not be a panacea or a remedy to use better formats, something that has to be adopted across the full board of the nation. And we believe that these national consultations instigated by us will encourage the Ministry of Justice inclusive to revert to the work that was started back in 2017, the work which is related to implementing in Ukraine periodical national surveys of the whole generation's legal needs. Unfortunately, this work under the current government, Mr. President Zelensky's government, has been suspended. So we believe, at least we hope, that our consultations will be a starting and a reference points for us to get back to these important discussions. And I would also like to reiterate that for this work, we have to involve and include all of the actors, all of the areas, as it was mentioned today, the representatives of healthcare, of education, social security, employees, both at the national central level and local levels likewise. And again, I hope this will become a very nice starting point for us to focus on these problem areas, and it will become part of the national agenda and the agenda of the National Ministry of Justice.
Thank you, Yevgen. That was helpful. I would now like to turn to Dimitri. Now, Dimitri, despite the challenges posed by the pandemic, there are opportunities for innovation and recalibration towards people-centered justice. In your experience, what innovative tools can be used to resolve and prevent people's justice problems? How can these innovations be brought to scale, and what financing mechanisms are needed to support justice innovation? The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be part of this discussion. Thank you to organizers who invited me, and thanks to panelists who gave interesting insights. What I can add as I work more with private sector innovations and with so-called startups that deal with legal and justice problems. What we want to do is we want to find game changers. Or let me even take one step back. So every year we have 1 billion new justice problems all over the world. And this gap is not closing. And unfortunately, all our efforts were not very efficient to bridge this gap. So at HEAL, we thought, okay, maybe we need to also think in a different way. And we spent quite a lot of time on researching what kind of tools and approaches can help to bridge this huge gap. And we came up with what we called game changers. Game changers is a wide category of services or approaches that are sustainable, scalable, and that potentially can even attract investment. So we did a research about that. You can read about it in a trend report. It's called Charging for Justice. I'm not gonna go really deep into it, but I will just mention a few of these game changers that we identified. So it could be user-friendly contracts. For example, you have an Xdraft, that's a platform that works in Ukraine, in the US, and in Europe that helps to draft contracts in minutes. It could be one-stop dispute resolution platforms. It could be claiming platforms. Now in Ukraine, you have multiple such platforms. For example, Lawyered. They help to protect your IP rights in just minutes. It could be also legal information platforms similar to what you have mentioned. It could be chatbots. You have a lot of them in private sector. For example, Pravoman, that's a private sector chatbot that won Innovating Justice Challenge that we do annually. And they already cover 100 typical cases that happen around legal and justice problems that happen in everyday life of Ukrainian citizens. That's more on the private side, but it could be also game changers. They could be also on the public side. For example, community justice services is also one of potential game changers that we identified. And I can say that we have a community paralegal program in Ukraine, Програма громадських радників, that is active in Ukraine. This is also a locally community-based potential game changer. So there are multiple game changers that could be scalable, that can provide scalable, sustainable solutions. And you asked how can these innovations can be brought to scale. I think Of course, this is a very hard question. I don't dare to answer it in a minute, but I would say there are internal things and external things. So internally, these innovators and game changers, I think they need knowledge and understanding of the human-centered approach. That's what Gustavo was speaking. And interestingly enough, we have in the private sector already functioning methodologies that were used by technological companies for decades. I'm talking about lean startup, about customer development, about design thinking, of course, about agile approach to teamwork. All these methodologies are described in books, and all of them are user-centered. All of them want to understand what is the need of the customer and try to create solution as cheaply as possible that will help the person. So I think we should be looking at the private sector also, because it can teach us these approaches, and that's what we are trying to help with. And that's about internal things. So knowledge and understanding of what is people-centered approach, these methodologies, how they develop, what kind of, and in general understanding that they already exist. It's nothing that we should invent now. It's already invented. We just need to rethink it and apply it to justice sector. And of course, external things like partnerships, but also financial capabilities. There is still a gap for early stage finances in Ukraine and in many countries. So if these innovations have no financial means to develop the product, it means we're not giving the possibility for these game changers to appear. So I would say still financing innovators and financing experimentation on the path to finding people-centered solutions is important. So I think maybe impact investment also would be the category that we would need to look on. So just to summarize very quickly, I would say that in order to bridge this huge gap, we need game changers, somebody who can radically bridge this gap. And for that, you need knowledge about people-centered approach, partnerships, and impact investment.
Thank you, Dimitri.
From my point of view, thanks.
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite an intervention from the floor. I would like to ask Adna Karamich-Oates, who's the Senior Program Officer for Thematic Priorities at OGP, to come in and to give a brief remark and to talk about the importance of using the Open Government Partnership as a platform for advancing commitments on people-centered justice. Adna, if you're there, would you mind coming in?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I apologize for not being on video and any background noise that you may hear. I appreciate the opportunity. Just to say a few words, I'm here, as Anthony said, on behalf of the Open Government Partnership, of which Ukraine has been a member since 2012. And for those that are less familiar with Open Government Partnership, it was founded in 2011 by 8 governments and 9 civil society leaders with a very simple but powerful mission to bring together champions of reform in government and civil society who share the belief that government serves citizens better when transparency, accountability, and inclusion are embedded into governance systems. And at the core of the Open Government Partnership is a domestic level dialogue between government and civil society, who together then co-design a set of open government commitments in 2-year action plans. Now, Ukraine has delivered 4 action plans since it joined the partnership in 2012. And throughout these action plans, and in working closely with civil society, it has advanced reforms in a lot of important areas: access to information, open data, anti-corruption. I'm sure everybody on the line is familiar with the Prozoro platform, which a reform that won the OGP award in 2016 and inspired many countries to think about opening up government contracting using online platforms. But one area that Ukraine has not worked on as much through its OGP action plan process is justice. We saw some interest demonstrated in the 2014 action plan. There was a commitment on amending the law on social services to ensure equal treatment to members of different social groups. There was also a commitment in the 2014 plan on community policing. And there was significant progress on both of these, but then there was a government change and these commitments were not carried over into the next action plan. So the one thing that I want to say today is that I can see from all the exchanges that there's a lot of momentum and a lot of interest in people-centered justice, and that's great to see. I want to offer to the government and civil society in Ukraine to see their OGP domestic framework as a tool for advancing on their shared priorities for people-centered justice. OGP is an action-oriented process. It has concrete milestones attached to commitments, so you can use it to implement that roadmap that Mr. Hope from USAID discussed as one of the outcomes of this meeting today. How do you do that? How can Ukraine take action on people-centered justice through OGP? The key is for reformers from justice institutions in the government and then civil society actors working on justice issues to be involved in the design of the action plan, to be part of the domestic multi-stakeholder process. This process is being led by the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. The OGP point of contact is Ms. Natalia Oksha. I'm going to put her contact information in the chat. I'm going to put mine as well. And I would encourage you to get in contact with Natalia in particular, but me as well, to talk about becoming part of the domestic OGP multi-stakeholder process and register your view that you would like people-centered justice to be part of the new action plan so that we can use it for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Adna. That was very helpful. I believe we may have somebody from North Macedonia also on here to make an intervention, but I'm not sure because we're running over time if he was able to stay on. If he is, you're welcome to come on. If not, we may move forward with the program. Okay, I think he may have had to leave because we're running over time. Well, I think, first of all, I want to thank Maha, Gustavo, Yevgen, and Dimitri for this very live interactive discussion. I think your interventions were very helpful in helping people understand a bit more about a people-centered approach to resolving justice problems. In the interest of time, we're going to move quickly to the breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are just really meant to be a teaser in terms of how we can apply people-centered approaches to some specific justice problems facing Ukrainian people today. The slide on the screen provides an overview of the 3 breakout sessions. You're asked, and because all the breakout sessions are only in Ukrainian, for those who will be participating, you're asked to please input which number that corresponds to the session you would like to join. And we're asked if you could do that now. So just to give you a brief summary, the first session will examine justice problems at work, including unemployment. The second session will examine violence and crimes against women. And the third session will examine access and quality of public services, specifically looking at the ID registration for IDPs. And the breakout sessions are really meant to build on the discussions during the interactive session. And because in the interest of time, we're going to limit the breakout sessions to about 25 to 30 minutes. Again, it's just an opportunity to briefly touch upon these. We will examine these problems in more depth for the second virtual meeting that we have planned. The sessions will be led by a moderator, and the rapporteurs will give a brief summary of those meetings following the breakouts. So I would now like to invite all of us to move to the breakout session. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the breakout sessions. I would now like to invite each of the rapporteurs to provide a very brief summary of the discussions that took place during the breakout sessions. And please note that we will try to make written reports of these meetings and make them available on the landing page with other documents from this meeting as well. So first, I would now like to invite Maxine Sherbatuk, who's the program officer of the Ukrainian Human Rights Union, to provide a summary of the session relating to problems at work. Maxine, the floor is yours.
Доброго дня всім. Насправді
Good afternoon.
дуже вдячний колегам
I'm
з
very
нашої
grateful to the colleagues
такої
from
групи, які
our group
доєдналися. На жаль, у нас було
who
дуже
joined
мало
us.
часу для того, щоб
Unfortunately,
обговорити
we didn't
навіть
have much time
певні аспекти цієї
to go
проблематики.
through
Ось, але
certain
всі
aspects of the issue
погодились
we
про
were
те, що
discussing,
сфера
but
трудових
everyone
прав, вона
agreed
дійсно
that
одна з найбільш
labor rights,
важливих в цьому
employment rights
аспекті, і
is one
особливо
of the most
в
important issues,
контексті
especially
карантину,
given
воно, звичайно,
the
викликає
context of
дуже
the
багато
quarantine and
проблем,
lockdown.
і,
It
власне, ті складнощі
raises a lot
системні,
of
які були в
issues, and
Україні
those
в цій
systemic
сфері,
issues that we
вони
experienced in
особливо
Ukraine
гостро далися
in
в
that
знаки під
regard,
час якраз
they
карантинних моментів.
were
І
actually
очевидно,
very
що тут є
emphasized
питання
during quarantine time.
забезпечення державою зайнятості, це питання
Providing of
звільнень, це
employment
питання
by the
неформальної
state,
зайнятості, це питання також
informal
вік
employment, termination,
економіки, його впливу на всі ці речі. Це також
economy,
тематика охорони праці, забезпечення умов праці.
providing
Ті речі,
proper
які
conditions,
дуже багато питань
working
викликають,
conditions,
і
lots of
також
issues that
питання
raise a lot of
заборгованості
questions,
зарплат також
as well
була
as
одна з тем, які піднімалися в цьому
deaths in
контексті.
salaries.
І
This
говорили
was
про те,
also
що дуже
discussed,
важливий в цьому
and our
певний
group
соціальний діалог, коли є
concluded that
повноцінне
social
залучення
dialogue is very
держав,
important
профспілок і
when
роботодавців для вирішення найбільш таких
the
кричущих
union,
речей.
the
Важливим
employers
є
are
інформаційні
engaged to
кампанії
resolve
проведення
issues.
для
Awareness
вирішення питань,
campaigns are
які
crucial
стосуються людей.
to tackle
Також
the
певних
issues
моментів, які
related to
пов'язані
people.
з шаблонами документів,
Also,
питанням
sample documents
підвищення
are
ефективності як
important.
позасудових
Increase in
механізмів,
efficiency of
які є
extrajudicial mechanisms
в цій сфері,
outside the
також і
courts that are
власне
available
судової
in this
системи,
area, as well as
оскільки
improving the efficiency of the
дуже
judiciary
часто
itself,
саме суд
since very
є
often
таким
it's
захисником
the
прав
court that is the
трудових прав.
protector of
І говорили про
labor
те, що
rights.
тут також є
What we also
багато
discussed
проблем. Це
is
і
the fact
питання
of the
з
abundance of
приводу
problems,
невиконання
in
судових рішень
particular
по
non-enforcement
різним
of
категоріям, і
court
в тому числі по
judgments,
трудовим
various
справам.
categories of
Говорили
cases,
про
labor cases
недосконалості
includingly. We
діяльності
also discussed
профспілок
the
і
imperfections in the
аспекти, які
union's
пов'язані з тим, що люди не завжди
activity.
знають, як
People do not
захистити
always know
свої
how
права в
to
цьому
protect their
напрямку. І
rights.
ці моменти
And
є одними з таких ключових, які, я би
this
хотів
is
би сказати. Наскільки
these
розумію, в
were the
мене
key points that I would like to
немає
share.
часу
As
зараз,
far as I
щоб
understand, I do not
більш
have
конкретніше
time
цим
to
поділитися, але
elaborate
в
on
напрацюванні
the points
групи
that
це
I've
можна
mentioned,
буде побачити.
but
І,
you'll
власне,
see that
у ГСПЛ в
in the
цьому
summary of our
аспекті
work. And
ми
Helsinki Human
плануємо
Rights Group,
також зробити окремий такий аналіз.
we plan to
Дякую.
conduct an analysis of those issues as well.
Well, thank you, Maxime. I would now like to invite Christina Kitt to report back on the session relating to violence and crimes against women. Please go ahead, Christina.
Дякую, колеги, вітаю
Thank you, dear colleagues. Greetings. I would like to thank our group, regardless of a low number of people attending, raised very important issues: gender-based violence, violence against women. What we discussed was the following: gender-based violence and violence against women is something that is not relevant for women only, but for the entire society. And these issues see women lawyers engaged, but we need to take a broader look, and we need to engage both men and women, people regardless of their gender. So these were the arguments that were mentioned in our discussion. Another very important issue is COVID-19 impact on the issue we were discussing. And as you're aware, and we mentioned that in the group, the pandemic brought forward these issues that we're discussing: access to justice, access to high quality legal services, and efficient protection against domestic violence in cases of domestic violence. And we were discussing protection by law enforcement and the increase of the cases of domestic violence, but at the same time, police provide information about the smaller number of restraining orders. Second, COVID. In the case of lockdown, second lockdown, we will need to think about offline legal services at least once a week, because nobody has the possibility to go online all the time. International experience shows that mobile legal aid groups are a good solution, but this practice has to be extended to make sure people receive legal aid. Another issue that we discussed were judges and courts, restraining orders and injunction in particular. We have sad statistics on this category of cases, which suggest low awareness of the legal community and the low use of the available tools by lawyers. On the other hand, maybe it's insufficient understanding on the part of the courts and judges, lack of understanding of this issue. Even though we know that the National School of Judges are working towards that, and these are key points that we focused in our discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christina. I would now like to invite Dimitro Kuzin to provide an overview of the breakout session relating to ID registration for IDPs. Thank you.
Дякую. Дійсно було.
Thank you. We didn't have much time and not very people joined the breakout session, but nonetheless, we came up with a number of issues. They can be stratified into two parts: organizational issues and financial issues. In terms of issues around registration, these are organizational problems that the government can resolve fast. For example, delegated the issue of delegation of an IDP, extending the term of the status of an IDP, providing certain services, social welfare to centers for administrative services. This could facilitate access of people that are on the territory controlled by Ukraine, as well as for people who are close to the line of contact on the occupied territories. They will be able to receive services from the state. In particular, registration of an IDP or identification of a person, which requires at the present contacting social protection departments, and if centers for administrative services are delegated these functions or other bodies that are similar to them, this in turn will help resolve the problem. Second, financial problems. These are providing accommodation to IDPs, providing housing and access to educational, medical services, and employment of IDPs. This is what requires careful consideration as well. There are several solutions, and we discussed those a bit. But the key thing that has to be done prior to dealing with the problem that I mentioned before is conducting a survey, a research, and we also need to identify the measuring tools. we need to identify which issues are the most painful, and we need to identify which issues can be resolved by the state and as soon as possible. And if this research is conducted, and actually the presenters touched upon that, identifying legal needs, this could give us the solutions to the problems. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Bro. I would now like to close this meeting by summarizing some of the key points that were raised throughout the course of the past few hours. First, we need to invest our resources in resolving the justice problems that matter most to people, that empower people and communities to seek justice and provide access to people-centered justice services that draw on the best evidence of what works. Secondly, we need to invest in justice systems that work for people. And we can do this by A, using data and evidence to steer justice reform, B, by unlocking the transformative power of innovation, by opening justice systems up to new actors and ideas, and by assessing the impact of innovation in closing the justice gap. 3, by implementing strategies for smarter justice financing, developing a national roadmap for financing justice for all, and accessing new sources of funding. And last but not least, by developing effective partnerships and strengthening collaboration amongst a diverse range of actors across sectors. But to achieve this requires a transformation of ambition. We encourage all of you to make bold and transformative commitments to ensure justice for all. Commitments on justice can take various forms. We have prepared a fact sheet which we have included on both the landing page for this virtual meeting as well as in the chat box that explains the types of commitments justice actors and organizations can make. And we're always here to assist you in helping to make those commitments. In terms of the next steps, a national technical working group will be formed. The committee, this working group or committee, will consist of a diverse set of justice actors and will prioritize and select particular justice problems facing Ukrainians that can serve as the basis of discussion for the second virtual meeting in the coming months. The technical working group or committee will also be tasked with developing an empirically based roadmap aimed at resolving these specific justice problems. If you are interested in joining this National Technical Working Group or Committee, please contact the USAID New Justice team. The contact details are listed in the chat box and will also be made available on the landing page. Now, on behalf of all the organizers of this virtual meeting, we thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next virtual meeting. Please note that the recording of this virtual session will be available on the YouTube page of the USAID New Justice Program. We now leave you with a short farewell video. Thank you, and it was a pleasure moderating this session. Take care.